His hand was trembling in mine, the skin papery and warm, and I could feel the faintest pulse racing beneath my fingertips. The room was quiet, the kind of hush that settles right before something irreversible, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. I've stood at the edge of so many moments like this, where the world seems to pause and the only thing that matters is the life in front of you. That night, the fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting long shadows across the white sheets, and the machines hummed their steady lullaby. I could hear the distant shuffle of shoes down the hallway, the soft murmur of voices behind closed doors, but in that small room, it was just the two of us. Me, a nurse with too many stories etched into her bones, and him, a man who had carried a secret longer than anyone knew. He looked up at me, his eyes brimming with something I couldn't name. Fear, maybe, or hope, or that bittersweet mixture that comes when you know you're about to let go. I'd seen that look before, more times than I care to count, but there was something different about him. Maybe it was the way he reached for my hand, not out of desperation, but with a kind of quiet resolve. His fingers, thin and cool, wrapped around mine, and I could feel the weight of everything he hadn't said pressing between us. I've always believed that hands tell stories, calluses, scars, the way they hold on or let go. His hand told me he'd worked hard, loved deeply, and carried burdens he never shared. The anesthesiologist was preparing the medication, her voice gentle as she explained what would happen next, but he barely seemed to hear her. His focus was on me, as if I was the only anchor he had left in this world. I squeezed his hand, offering the kind of comfort that only comes from years of standing at bedsides, whispering promises that sometimes you can keep and sometimes you can't. I told him he'd be all right, that I'd be there when he woke up, but I could see in his eyes that he knew there were no guarantees. There never are, not in this place. And then, right before the medicine took him away, he squeezed my fingers with surprising strength. He pulled me a little closer, his voice barely more than a breath, and he whispered words that changed everything I thought I knew about him. Words that peeled back the layers of who he was, revealing a truth he'd hidden for weeks, maybe for years. I felt my heart stutter in my chest, the kind of ache that comes from understanding too late, from realizing that even after decades in this job, there are still stories that can break you open and put you back together all at once. Secrets have a way of hiding in plain sight, even in a hospital full of beeping machines and tired nurses. I've learned that sometimes the most important things are the ones we're too afraid to say until the very last moment. My name is Kathleen, and after all my years walking these halls, I thought nothing could surprise me anymore. I've held the hands of the dying, comforted the grieving, celebrated the small victories that no one else notices. I've seen miracles and heartbreak, sometimes in the same shift. But what he told me before closing his eyes, it broke my heart and healed something inside me all at once. In that moment, I realized that no matter how many years you spend caring for others, there's always another lesson waiting for you, another secret to be trusted with, another soul reaching out for connection before the world goes quiet. And that night, in that small, silent room, I learned that even the oldest wounds can be touched by a simple act of truth, whispered in the dark just before sleep. It was a Tuesday evening, the kind that sneaks up on you in the hospital. Quiet at first, with the sun long gone and the city lights flickering outside the windows. The corridors were washed in that familiar soft yellow glow, and every so often, the PA system would crackle to life with a call for a doctor or a gentle reminder from housekeeping. I'd been on shift since the early afternoon, and by then, the weight of the day had settled into my bones, the way only a lifetime of double shifts and sleepless nights can do. My shoes squeaked down the hallway as I checked room after room, offering a smile or a gentle word, collecting charts, tucking in blankets, and listening to the endless hum of machines and the quiet sighs of patients lost in their own worlds. That night, I remember the air felt heavier than usual. Maybe it was because of the storm that had rolled in, rain tapping against the windows, or maybe it was just the kind of heaviness that comes when you sense change before it arrives. The nurse's station was cluttered with coffee cups and half-finished notes, and the tired faces of my colleagues were lit by the blue glow of computer screens. I passed Donna and Richard in the hallway, both of them with their sleeves rolled up, swapping stories about their children while they worked. There's a camaraderie that grows among us, the kind you only find when you've held each other up through heartbreak and exhaustion. We lean on jokes and small kindnesses, holding each other together when the world feels like it's falling apart. I'd just finished checking on Mrs. Shirley in 212. She'd had a rough day, missing her late husband, and I sat with her for a while, letting her talk about the old garden they used to tend together. I've learned through the years that sometimes the best medicine is just listening, really listening, as if every word is precious. When I finally got up, she squeezed my hand and thanked me, eyes glistening. It's those small moments that remind me why I keep coming back, even when my body aches and my heart feels heavy. I made my way toward the end of the hall where room 217 waited. The door was half closed, and inside the soft light made everything look gentle, almost safe. That was his room. I'd been caring for him for weeks, watching him drift in and out of sleep, his body growing weaker, his spirit quieter. There was a sadness to him that I recognized, an old familiar ache that settles into people who have carried too much for too long. He didn't ask for much, never complained, always polite, but I noticed the way he watched the world from his bed, as if he was waiting for something or someone who never quite arrived. I paused at the door, taking a breath and smoothing my uniform, the way I always do before stepping into a room where the air feels fragile. It's a habit I picked up years ago, a small ritual to remind myself to bring gentleness with me, even on the hardest nights. As I entered, he turned his head, his eyes meeting mine with a tired sort of gratitude. I set his chart down and pulled a chair close to his bedside, noticing how the rain had left streaks on the window behind him. For a moment, we just sat in silence, surrounded by the steady beeping of the monitors and the soft rustle of sheets. It's in those quiet spaces that the real work happens. Not the bandages or the medicine, but the simple act of sitting with another person, letting them know they're not alone. I've learned that sometimes the best thing you can offer is your presence, your willingness to stay. As I looked at him, I felt that old, aching tenderness that comes from seeing someone's soul laid bare. I didn't know then what secrets he held or how that night would unfold, but I knew as I sat there in the half-light that I was exactly where I was meant to be. That's the thing about nursing. Sometimes the greatest acts of care happen in the quiet, between the rush and the emergencies, in the soft hush of a hospital room at night. And as I sat with him, listening to the storm outside and the gentle rhythm of his breathing, I realized that these moments, these small, almost invisible acts of kindness, are what truly shape a life, both for the patient and for those of us who care for them. In the end, it's not the big gestures or the dramatic rescues that stay with you, but the quiet presence, the shared silences, and the knowledge that, even for just a little while, you made someone feel seen and safe in a world that can be so uncertain. There are moments in nursing that carve themselves into your memory, not because of the chaos or the emergencies, but because of the gentle, human details that quietly unfold beyond the bustle. That night with him, I found myself tuning in to every small sign, every breath, every fleeting expression. Sometimes I think that's what happens after years in this job. Your heart tunes itself to the softest signals, the unspoken grief, the gratitude that trembles just under the surface. I watched him as he stared out the rain-streaked window, his gaze unfocused, lost somewhere in the past, perhaps remembering a time when things were easier or a face he missed. He'd always been polite, always thanked me for the smallest things, but there was a loneliness in those thanks, a silence that felt heavy, as if he'd made peace with being alone long before he ever came to our ward. That night, I adjusted his blanket and asked how he was feeling. He smiled, a tired, gentle smile, and said he was all right. I knew he wasn't. I've learned to hear the truth in the pauses between words, the way someone fidgets with the edge of a sheet or glances away as they answer. He told me about his daughter, Sophia, who lived out of state, and how he hoped to see her before he got much weaker. He shared little things, stories about fishing trips and Sunday breakfast, and I listened, holding those memories safe for him. I asked if he wanted me to call her, and he shook his head, saying, "Not yet, soon." The storm outside was growing louder, thunder rolling in the distance. The machines in the room flickered in time with the flashes of lightning, and for a while we sat in a comfortable quiet. I wrote my notes, then put down the pen and simply sat beside him, hands folded in my lap, just present. It's in these moments that you really feel the weight and grace of the work. Nursing isn't just about IVs and medications. It's about sitting with someone in their uncertainty, being the witness to their fears and their hopes, sharing the silence when words feel too heavy. Sometimes I think that our hands do more healing by just holding, just being there, than any medicine could ever do. When dinner trays came, I helped him with his soup, steadying his trembling hand. He apologized for the trouble, and I told him gently that it was no trouble at all. "You remind me of my mother," he said, his voice soft. "She used to sit with me when I was sick. She never left, not even once." I smiled, feeling the familiar ache in my chest that comes when a patient lets you into their most sacred memories. There's a vulnerability in illness that strips away all pretense, leaving only what matters: kindness, presence, and the longing for connection. As the shift wore on, I found myself thinking about all the hands I'd held through the years, the stories they carried, the secrets sometimes whispered and sometimes kept locked away. I wondered what secrets he was carrying now, what words might be waiting for the right moment. Later, as the rain softened and the night grew deeper, I checked on him again. He was dozing, but when I touched his shoulder, he opened his eyes and smiled. "Thank you for not rushing," he whispered. "It's been a long time since someone just sat with me." That touched me more than I can say. In a world that moves so fast, sometimes the most precious gift we can give is our time, our patience, our willingness to simply be there. I stayed with him a while longer, listening to the storm and the steady rhythm of his breathing, feeling the quiet bond that had grown between us. I hope you're still with me, listening to this story. Tell me, where are you hearing my voice from tonight? I'd love to know where in the world my words are finding you. Sometimes just sharing a story with someone far away is enough to remind us that we're not alone in this big, uncertain world. Sometimes in this line of work, you can almost sense when something is about to shift. It's like the air changes, heavier, charged with something you can't quite name. That night, I felt it deep in my bones as I made my rounds, pausing at his door one last time before the surgical team was due to arrive. The rain outside was easing now, only a soft tapping against the glass, but inside, a new tension had settled, a hush before the storm that would come not from the sky, but from within these four walls. I glanced at the clock and saw the time ticking closer to the procedure. I'd seen the orderlies roll the gurney down the hallway, heard the distant clatter of trays being cleared, and felt the quiet anticipation from the other nurses as they wrapped up their work for the evening. It was as if everyone in the hospital knew, in their own way, that this was a moment that mattered, even if they didn't know why. When I entered, he was awake, his eyes brighter than I'd seen in days. There was a clarity to him, a sense that he was ready for whatever was to come. His hands trembled slightly as I checked his IV, and I tried to offer him the same steadiness I always had, even though my own heart was racing a little faster than usual. I asked if he was comfortable, if there was anything he needed, and he shook his head gently. "Just stay," he said, the words soft but certain. So I did. I pulled a chair close and sat by his bedside, letting the silence stretch between us, filled only by the gentle rhythm of his breathing and the subtle beeping of the monitors. The anesthesiologist came in, a young woman named Jennifer with a kind smile and a soft voice that always seemed to calm the anxious. She explained the process, speaking directly to him, but her words seemed to hang in the air, almost background to the energy moving between the two of us. He listened, nodded, but his gaze kept returning to me, as if searching for something. Maybe reassurance, maybe forgiveness, maybe just the comfort of another human presence in a moment of great vulnerability. The surgical team arrived, and the room filled with quiet activity. Gloves snapped on, labels checked, charts reviewed. Still, I stayed by his side, holding his hand in both of mine. There's something sacred about those minutes before sedation, when a patient is suspended between fear and hope, between the world as it is and the unknown that waits. He squeezed my hand, and I felt the weight of all the things he hadn't said, all the fears and memories he carried, pressing into my palm. I could see the effort it took for him to keep his composure, the way his jaw tightened, the way his eyes glistened even as he tried to smile. Just as Jennifer prepared the medication, he turned to me again, his voice trembling but clear enough to cut through all the noise and bustle. "Kathleen," he whispered, and there was so much meaning in the way he said my name that it startled me. In that moment, everything else faded away. The medical routines, the fluorescent lights, the storm outside. It was just the two of us, bound by the quiet truth that sometimes the most important moments in life are the ones that happen in the space between words, in the gentle pressure of a hand, in the bravery it takes to reach out when you're most afraid. I'd been through so many nights like this, but something about this one made my hands feel unsteady. I could sense the gravity of what was coming, the secret he'd been holding on to for weeks, maybe longer. The room grew quieter still. Every breath and heartbeat amplified. I squeezed his hand back, silently telling him I was there, that I saw him, that whatever he was carrying, he didn't have to carry it alone. It was in that fragile, suspended moment, just before the medicine, just before sleep, that everything changed. And though I've lived through decades of these turning points, this one would leave a mark on my heart I'd never quite forget. In those final moments before sedation, the world seemed to shrink down to just the space between our hands, and I understood more deeply than ever how much courage it takes to let someone in when you're at your most vulnerable. There's always a moment, right before the hardest part, when you realize just how fragile everything is. That night, as the surgical team settled in and Jennifer readied the medication, I could feel my own breath catch, the weight of exhaustion and worry pressing into my shoulders. The storm outside was now a memory, but inside that room, another kind of storm was brewing, one that had nothing to do with rain and thunder and everything to do with the secrets we keep and the courage it takes to let them out. I watched him watching me, his eyes shining with something I couldn't quite name, a mix of fear, hope, and the need to be seen for who he really was. I squeezed his hand, feeling the pulse of his life beneath my skin, and tried to anchor us both with calm, though my own heart was pounding in my chest. But the truth is, even after decades in these hallways, I still feel the tremor of uncertainty in moments like this. The machines beeped a little faster, nurses whispered outside the door, and every movement seemed magnified in the hush of anticipation. Jennifer's voice was gentle as she explained what would happen, but I could see that he wasn't really listening. He was focused on me, and in that gaze was a silent plea not just to be cared for, but to be understood. The other staff moved with practiced efficiency, but I felt the familiar ache of helplessness that comes when you know you can't fix everything, when what's needed most isn't a needle or a pill, but simply a hand to hold and the space to be honest. He was brave, braver than most, but I could see the fear flickering behind his eyes. I knew that fear. I'd witnessed it in so many others, but each time it's new, raw, unfiltered. He looked smaller in the bed, pale against the white sheets, and for a moment I saw not just a patient, but a man who had lived, loved, and now stood at the edge of something he couldn't control. I thought about his daughter, Sophia, the way he spoke of her with a longing that broke my heart, and I wondered if she knew how much he carried for her, how much he wished he could say. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. My name, trembling with meaning. Kathleen, he said, and it was as if the room itself leaned in to listen. I bent closer, my heart pounding. The world shrank to that bed, that moment, the softness of his hand in mine. He told me, with a quiet urgency, about the secret he'd been holding, his regrets, his hopes, the truth he'd been too afraid to speak out loud. I felt every word settle into me, heavy and healing all at once. I nodded, tears stinging my eyes, and promised I would remember, that I would carry his story with me no matter what happened next. The medication was ready, and Jennifer gave me a soft nod. I squeezed his hand, feeling the tremor of his nerves and the strength of his trust. As the sedative began to work, his grip tightened, then loosened, and I watched as he drifted toward sleep, his face finally peaceful. The team moved quickly, but I lingered, letting the moment hold me a little longer, letting his words echo in the quiet. In that hour, the world outside didn't matter, just the fragile miracle of two souls meeting in honesty. That's what stays with you, long after the night has ended, long after the shift is over and the lights are dimmed in the hallway. I wonder, as you listen, if you've ever been in a moment like that, where everything else falls away and all that's left is the truth. If you have, I hope you'll share your story. And if you haven't, I hope you hold close the people who trust you with theirs. Sometimes just being there, truly being there, is the bravest thing any of us can do. If this story touched you even a little, I invite you to subscribe or share a memory of your own. We're all holding on to something, and sometimes sharing it is the only way to heal. After the doors closed behind the surgical team and the last footsteps faded down the hallway, I sat there for a long time, letting the quiet settle back into the room. The world outside seemed to pause, as if even the rain was holding its breath. I looked down at my own hands, still feeling the echo of his grip, the warmth of his trust, and the weight of the secret he had finally let slip. There is something sacred about those moments after the storm, when the urgency of the work fades and you are left with only your thoughts and the memories of what just passed. I've learned over the years that these are the times when the healing truly begins, when you let yourself feel everything you've been holding back for the sake of others. I found myself thinking about all the patients I've cared for, all the stories shared in whispers and tears, and how each one shapes you in ways you never expect. The hospital was quieter now, the night shift routine returning to its slow, steady rhythm. I could hear Donna laughing softly at the nurse's station, her voice a gentle comfort in the darkness, and the distant sound of a mop being dragged along the floor by Harold, who always worked late and never complained. Life goes on in a hospital, even after the stormiest moments. New patients arrive, babies are born, farewells are whispered, and the circle continues. But inside me, something was different. His words lingered, not as a burden, but as a gift. There was a peace in knowing that he hadn't gone into that surgery alone, that he had found the courage to share the truth he'd held for so long. I thought of Sophia and hoped she would one day understand just how much her father loved her, how much he wanted her to know the real man behind the quiet smiles and polite thank yous. Sitting in that dimly lit room, I felt the ache of exhaustion and the gentle grace that comes from bearing witness to something real. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the silence wrap around me like a blanket. The monitors hummed their soft lullaby, and I found comfort in the small, steady signs of life all around me, the heartbeat of the hospital, the breathing of those who still needed care, the memory of a hand held in trust. For all the years I've spent here, I still believe there's a kind of holiness in these quiet hours after the storm. It's when the world is at its stillest that you can finally feel the weight of what you carry and maybe, just maybe, set some of it down. I smiled to myself, thinking of the secret I'd been trusted with, and felt a quiet gratitude for the chance to be there, to listen, to witness the moment when a soul finds peace. These are the nights that remind me why I keep coming back, no matter how tired I get or how many losses I've weathered. Because in the end, it isn't just about saving lives. It's about sharing them, holding space for each other's truths, and finding hope in the calm that follows every storm. As the hours slipped by, I checked on my other patients, but my mind kept drifting back to him. I watched the rain finally stop, the city lights reflecting off the wet pavement outside, and I thought about how every storm eventually passes, leaving behind a world that feels just a little bit different. I made my way back to his room, just to sit for a moment longer, to let the peace of that space settle into my bones. I whispered a quiet prayer for him, for Sophia, for all the families who carry burdens in silence. There is a kind of healing that happens not with medicine, but with presence, with the willingness to stay, to witness, to care. That night, I felt it more deeply than ever. I hope, wherever you are, that you find your own moments of calm after the storm, and that you remember, even in the quiet, you are never truly alone. After the doors closed behind the surgical team and the last footsteps faded down the hallway, I sat there for a long time, letting the quiet settle back into the room. The world outside seemed to pause, as if even the rain was holding its breath. I looked down at my own hands, still feeling the echo of his grip, the warmth of his trust, and the weight of the secret he had finally let slip. There is something sacred about those moments after the storm, when the urgency of the work fades and you are left with only your thoughts and the memories of what just passed. I've learned over the years that these are the times when the healing truly begins, when you let yourself feel everything you've been holding back for the sake of others. I found myself thinking about all the patients I've cared for, all the stories shared in whispers and tears, and how each one shapes you in ways you never expect. Sometimes, after the adrenaline has worn off and the busyness has faded, what's left is a raw tenderness, an ache that is both heavy and oddly comforting because it means you've really cared. The hospital was quieter now, the night shift routine returning to its slow, steady rhythm. I could hear Donna laughing softly at the nurse's station, her voice a gentle comfort in the darkness, and the distant sound of a mop being dragged along the floor by Harold, who always worked late and never complained. Life goes on in a hospital, even after the stormiest moments. New patients arrive, babies are born, farewells are whispered, and the circle continues. But inside me, something was different. His words lingered, not as a burden, but as a gift. There was a peace in knowing that he hadn't gone into that surgery alone, that he had found the courage to share the truth he'd held for so long. I thought of Sophia and hoped she would one day understand just how much her father loved her, how much he wanted her to know the real man behind the quiet smiles and polite thank yous. Sitting in that dimly lit room, I felt the ache of exhaustion and the gentle grace that comes from bearing witness to something real. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the silence wrap around me like a blanket. The monitors hummed their soft lullaby, and I found comfort in the small, steady signs of life all around me. The heartbeat of the hospital, the breathing of those who still needed care, the memory of a hand held in trust. For all the years I've spent here, I still believe there's a kind of holiness in these quiet hours after the storm. It's when the world is at its stillest that you can finally feel the weight of what you carry, and maybe, just maybe, set some of it down. I smiled to myself, thinking of the secret I'd been trusted with, and felt a quiet gratitude for the chance to be there, to listen, to witness the moment when a soul finds peace. These are the nights that remind me why I keep coming back, no matter how tired I get or how many losses I've weathered. because in the end, it isn't just about saving lives. It's about sharing them, holding space for each other's truths, and finding hope in the calm that follows every storm. The longer I sat there, the more I realized how much I needed these quiet moments too. They're where I find my own sense of meaning, the reason I keep putting on my uniform, tying my shoes, and showing up, shift after shift. As the hours slipped by, I checked on my other patients, but my mind kept drifting back to him. I watched the rain finally stop, the city lights reflecting off the wet pavement outside. And I thought about how every storm eventually passes, leaving behind a world that feels just a little bit different. I made my way back to his room just to sit for a moment longer, to let the peace of that space settle into my bones. I whispered a quiet prayer for him, for Sophia, for all the families who carry burdens in silence. There is a kind of healing that happens, not with medicine, but with presence, with a willingness to stay, to witness, to care. That night, I felt it more deeply than ever. I hope, wherever you are, that you find your own moments of calm after the storm, and that you remember, even in the quiet, you are never truly alone. If you've ever found yourself sitting in the aftermath of your own storm, I hope you let yourself rest there, breathe it in, and know that someone, somewhere, understands. I find myself thinking back to that night more often than I'd like to admit. The world has a way of moving on, but some moments, like the one I shared with him, linger in the quiet spaces between heartbeats. He squeezed my hand so tightly before sedation, and in that final, trembling moment, he pulled me close and told me a truth he had hidden for weeks. He whispered that he'd spent his whole life trying to be strong for everyone else, always carrying the burdens and the fears of those he loved, never letting them see how lost or afraid he truly felt. He told me he wished he'd said more to Sophia, that he'd found the words to tell her how proud he was, how much he missed her laughter filling the house, how her absence echoed in every quiet morning. His voice cracked with regret, but there was relief in the admission, like the secret had been a weight pressing on his chest for too long, and in letting go, he could finally breathe again. He asked me to make sure Sophia knew the truth if he never woke up, that she was his greatest joy, that no distance or silence could ever change that. I promised him I would, and I meant it with all my heart. I have never taken lightly the trust people place in me at their most vulnerable, and I could feel the gravity of his words settle into my soul. I watched as the medicine pulled him gently under, his face softening as if the years of worry had finally eased their grip. In that fragile, suspended moment, the world seemed to shrink to the space between our hands, and I understood, more deeply than ever, how much courage it takes to let someone see you for who you really are. When I left his room that night, my steps were heavy, but my heart was lighter in a way I hadn't expected. I carried his story with me, his fears, his hopes, his love for his daughter, like a quiet lantern in the darkness. I thought about all the years I'd walked these halls, about the secrets and heartbreaks and small joys I'd witnessed. I have learned that nursing is less about fixing and more about witnessing, about being present for the raw, unpolished moments of truth. It takes strength to hold another's pain, but even more to let them hold yours, even if only for a heartbeat. As the days passed, I kept my promise. I called Sophia and told her what her father had wished for her to know. There were tears, grateful, aching tears, and a silence on the other end of the line that told me she had needed those words more than anything. Sometimes I think the greatest healing comes not from medicine, but from truth spoken at the right moment, from love that reaches across the distance, and from the courage to be honest when it matters most. So, if you find yourself sitting in the quiet after your own storms, remember, you are not alone. There is power in sharing your truth and letting others see the parts of you that are scared or weary or hopeful. Sometimes, all it takes is one honest moment, one hand held in the dark, to change a life. That's what he gave me that night, and it's what I try to give, in my own way, every day I walk these halls. We may not always be able to heal every wound, but we can always show up, listen, and honor the stories we're trusted with. That's the greatest lesson I've learned in all my years, a lesson I leave with you now as I finish this story. Hold each other close, speak your truths when you can, and remember that even the smallest acts of kindness can carry someone through the longest night. My name is Kathleen, and if my story found its way to you, I hope it brings a little comfort, a little courage, and a reminder that in the end, we are all just looking for someone to hold our hand and truly see us. And if you ever find yourself in a quiet room, holding someone's hand before a big moment, remember, sometimes the greatest gift you can give is simply to be there, to listen, and to let them know they are not alone. That's what I've carried with me all these years, and it's what I hope you carry forward too.